Okay, we are live.
Hi everyone. We're here for the fourth make cycle of the Connected Learning Massive Open Online Collaboration. And this is our Make With Me Hangout. I'd like to talk today a little bit about what it means to be a networked educator and also the importance of writing and the idea that writing is indeed making. But before we jump into all those great topics, I want to have introductions, and I'll start with myself. I'm Mia Zamora, and I'm the director of the Kane University Writing Project. I also am an associate professor of English here at Kane University. And I'd like to pass the baton to my assistant director, Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica Holland-Lucci. I was the one on CL MOOC that said that I recently got married, so I'm adjusting to the new last name. And I'm also the tech liaison for the Kane University Writing Project.
I'm Kim Kiefer, the director of the Summer Institute at the Kane Writing Project, and also a high school English teacher at Rahway High School here in New Jersey.
Mary Ellen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Mary Ellen Banfield. I'm a participant in the CL MOOC and also a student here at Kane University in the Master of Writing Studies program.
And we also have a wonderful TC, Dana.
Hi, my name is Dana Kansian. I am a TC here at the Kane Summer Institute. I also teach 8th grade language arts in Carteret, New Jersey for Carteret Middle School.
Excellent. And my last introduction is a special one because we have a guest here at Kane University. We're very honored to spend some time with her. She came yesterday, and we had a wonderful paper circuitry workshop where we all got down and dirty and did some hacking together very creatively. And then today we've been able to hear from her quite a bit about her practices in the classroom. Ultimately, she inspired all of us. She's written a book called Thrive. I'm holding it up so you can get a visual on it. There it is. Thrive by Minu Rami. Minu, you want to just say hi?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to Mia and everyone on this hangout. It's been amazing to share some time at Kane University, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity.
Excellent. So as I was saying earlier, this week has been the Hack Your Writing Week, which is a bit of a challenge. Sometimes, writing comes with strain. We think of writing as a difficult thing, especially students. And I've been thinking a lot lately, generally, about the notion that writing is making, a production-centered engagement. And these days, with digital tools, what they are, the applications out there for all of us, there are so many creative entry points to writing. Our practice as writers has sort of exponentially grown, evolved due to the tools we have at our fingertips. So when I threw out that call to hack your writing, I was embracing a notion of remix and innovative customization, and ultimately I wanted to shed light on the evolution of writing process and the kinds of things we can do as practitioners of writing and as teachers of writing. So I definitely want to have a conversation about writing today, but I also wanted to point our attention in this Make With Me Hangout to some of the connected learning principles that have been so sort of formative and foundational to our connected learning massive open online collaboration, the CL MOOC. Each of us here and out there, all of you, we're all a part of this CL MOOC, and it's been wonderful. And that CL, I wanted to emphasize, connected learning. There are many connected learning principles, but there are 4 that I kind of wanted to generate a bit of the conversation around. So I thought I'd start with the idea of networked learning, because in my opinion, Minu is an example of someone who has understood that the power of network learning in a profound way. So I kind of wanted to start with Minu and just ask you some simple questions. How did you build this professional learning network of yours? Many people know you for your Ing chat or ENG chat on Twitter weekly. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then some of the mentors that you found along the way, and how you've grown your community of educators and your practice of educating through that notion of community, because I think that would inspire us all in thinking about connected learning.
I think that's a really good question, and the idea of the role mentors have played in my life is such a close one to my heart. I think around my 4th and 5th year as a teacher, I was starting to realize that I needed to deepen my practice, and I needed to broaden my horizon as an educator. And I wasn't actually, not at my current school, but at my former school, I wasn't really part of a learning community within the school. I wasn't being nurtured by anyone. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I was grappling, but not the good sort of grappling. I was just struggling and not able to really find answers for myself. It was actually finding my local site, my Philadelphia Writing Project site, that sort of got me to think a little bit about what it means to learn in a community and how that can shape a teacher's practice. During that summer, after going through the Summer Institute, I was hanging out a little bit on Twitter. I was following educators. I was trying to figure out by watching from afar what were some of the practices that they were taking part in. And I kept saying to people over and over again that there should be a Twitter chat specifically for English teachers. There was a very large and very robust ed chat, which still happens to this day. But there wasn't a specific Twitter chat or a conversation via Twitter for English teachers. And people just got sick of me saying that over and over again, and just started saying back to me, well, if you really want to do this, why don't you start one? And I think I had like 100 followers at that time, barely. And I was like, I can't do that. But maybe because I had just gone through the Writing Project Summer Institute experience, I was really thinking about teacher agency and teacher leadership and what it means to contribute to one's profession. So I took a leap of faith, and I reached out to my mentors like Jim Burke, who really understood the power of this network very early on, and hosted one of the first ones. And then I also realized that it would be important for me to bring in guests. And over these past 4 years, this community has just grown tremendously. Hundreds of teachers, probably thousands of teachers daily share their questions, resources, ideas via this hashtag. And in some ways, it has gotten so much bigger than what I had imagined, and a lot of people like don't even know that it was like this little, 6-year teacher from Philadelphia who started it. But I think that's the power of it. I think when thoughtful practitioners connect, I think amazing things happen, and I think that's why in-person networks and online networks, both of them have their values. I think it's so important for teachers to see the teacher across the hall and the teacher across the country both as resource and a potential way to learn about their practice. And for me, whether it's through my online network or whether it's through my many visits to places like Kane University, I'm constantly on the lookout from the next person that I can learn something from, something that I can bring back to my own students. I think it goes back to the idea as teachers, as learners, like if we are constantly honing our practice, if we're constantly finding ways to connect and learn from others, I think we can bring that ethos and that energy to our own practice. And I think that models lifelong learning in such a deep and honest way that I think it really resonates with our students. I don't think we can talk about lifelong learning if we're not doing it.
Absolutely. I second that motion with wholeheartedness. Erica, I thought maybe you might want to throw in some comments about, the professional learning network that you rely on your, in your daily life.
Okay. Well, so I guess when it comes to, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure. Okay. So basically, especially when it came to the time, I'm actually currently a Rutgers graduate student. I'm working on my PhD, and when it came time for me to start networking to find educators who I could study, who also happened to be gamers because I'm interested in teacher gamers, I discovered Twitter, and it sort of became a huge part of my life. That explicitly became a huge part of my online networking. And the hashtag for me, and I participated in many ENG chats, and I've gotten so much from them. And that sort of had me exploring other hashtags, and one of them is GBL, which is game-based learning. And I have found such a rich community of fellow educators who are interested in engaging gaming practices, and it has been so great because I've actually found some of my actual participants for my dissertation as a result of following that hashtag and finding others who have been communicating with one another, including an entire community of teachers that play WoW together, which is awesome. So that to me is just the power of network learning at its core. The fact that not only could I find teachers that are having their students use games, but what I was really looking for was the teachers that were gamers themselves, because not everybody likes to admit to that. And I found a whole group of them, and so that for me was huge. And so that is a large part of how the connected learning fit into my current existence in academia.
Yeah, it seems that one of the great things about connecting in the social media space is that you can have very pointed or particular interests that lead you into broader interests. So maybe the broader interest is education and learning, but then there are kind of these specialties that we all have, right? And it's wonderful to find those smaller networks and the broader ones and to float in and out of all of them. So yeah, that's a very important aspect of what it means to be networked. Maybe we could move on to another connected learning principle, and the next one I wanted to sort of explore a little bit is the idea of peer learning. As I mentioned earlier, we had a wonderful workshop yesterday. We lit up our notebooks. We played with copper tape and LEDs and our imagination, and some amazing things came out of it. But I thought, Dana is a local teacher here, and she was working with a lot of her colleagues, so she put herself in the position of the learner yesterday. So I thought I'd ask her about peer learning within her own classroom or the peer learning she experienced yesterday.
Thanks, Mia. Yesterday was a crazy experience, and I say crazy in a good way because it was totally like being back as a student. And like you're saying with the peer learning, all of a sudden we're helping each other, and at first it was so daunting, especially with any of these makes. We're here as teachers, we're very usually technical and used to, okay, we do it this way and there's no deviation from it. And then here coming to the Institute, it was like, listen, you can do what you want and you have that felt need. So we were all into our projects, and then we were helping each other. And that's what teachers want to see in the classroom. You don't want to be the boss of the classroom. You want to be a facilitator. And like Minu had mentioned in her book, you want to inspire your students. You don't want to run what you want them to do. You want them to find their inspiration, find their passion. And I think that the peer learning really helps students find their passions. It's so important. And then once those students find their passion, the felt need is there, the students are learning, and your classroom's running beautifully.
In many ways, if you model the passion that can exist in being curious about certain things, then it sort of is infectious, right? And when they lean over each other's shoulder, which is what I got shots of you guys doing yesterday, my camera was constantly on the move yesterday. I got a lot of shots of the TCs leaning over each other's shoulders, sharing what they learned on the spot, and the little tricks of how to make the tape work, etc., etc. It was wonderful. It was definitely pure learning on the ground in the most effective sense. Another connected learning principle that I wanted to sort of, throw out a nod to is the notion of interest-driven learning. How do we draw out the power of what our own students are interested in? Each of our students is an individual that has a variety of possible entry points for the work that they're doing, the things for learning, for coming into their own as someone who's thinking in powerful ways, right? So that's a challenge. How do we harness what is interesting to them in effective ways in the classroom? I thought maybe the two other teachers here who I think are very, well, everybody here is good at this, but I wanted to throw this question out to both Kim and Minu, because I know they're both fantastic at understanding their students and thinking about this question.
Let me.
Oh, Minu, go ahead.
Minu, yeah.
All right, thank you. I think our students are used to the idea that their voice matters, and they have these deep and rich lives where they're makers and doers outside of our classrooms. I think sometimes we don't even know, but our students are filmmakers, or they're DJs, or they're artists, and they are like, they have online like t-shirt business, and they're like doing promotions work, and they're doing so many different work, so many different types of work that we may not even know, or may not even be leveraging in our classroom. And I think when they come into our classrooms, I think if we're not harnessing that energy, if we're not tapping into that energy, if we're not tapping into that expertise, I think we're missing out on a potential big moment for learning and for collaboration. I think student-centered or student interest-driven learning can look really different from classroom to classroom. But I think for me, it means that I want to connect my students' lives to the books that will matter to them at that particular moment in their lives. So I'm always a big proponent of choice reading in my classroom, balancing the canon versus contemporary titles. And it's not even a dichotomy. I think like in my own reading diet, I'm reading something that's hundreds of years old to something that came out last week in the New Yorker. And I think our kids need to experience that and need to be able to read complex texts from all different eras and all different genres. So that's one big component of student-centered or student-driven, interest-driven learning. And I think whenever we're asking kids to write, how can we probe our students to ask deep and rich and complex questions, and then how do we empower them to go find those answers or present what they're learning about those questions? So asking kids to think about teen brains, or how sleep affects teen brains, or I think asking kids what are the questions that they bring, what are the inquiries that they bring into our learning communities, should shape a lot of our teaching. I think if we set the agenda for what should be uncovered in the classroom, I think we're missing out on some really interesting things that our kids are grappling with outside of our classroom walls, whether it's issues of human rights or social change or equity. I think our kids are already grappling with these big questions about, like, who am I? What is my role in the world? How can I make the world a better place? I think they're already thinking about these things, and these big issues of poverty and immigration and educational equity. These aren't these like highbrow concepts. Like, they experience these things in their own lives, and these big ideas affect their own lives. So how can we bring those tensions into our classrooms, but then turn them into opportunities for discovery, opportunities for learning? I think we need to honor, in short, I think we need to honor our students' own inquiries and leverage their interests to make learning meaningful for them.
Absolutely. You're speaking my language. I think the point of inquiry is so important, and teach them that they can ask questions and they can look for the answers on their own terms in the world. We're guiding them to do that. Kim, you're such a master teacher. I'm sure you have strategies for drawing out what matters to them within your own practice. I thought maybe you would want to weigh in a bit.
Thanks, Minu. Mia.
It's hard. Minu, Mia.
I was thinking while Minu was talking about her classroom about this idea of educational equity and how important it is to get that started by making the time in our overstressed classrooms to write. And it goes back to the very fundamentals of the National Writing Project, where at the beginning of the year, it's really worth it to set aside that time to write. No English teacher ever got into too much trouble as an observer walked into her classroom if the students were writing, no matter what the task was. And I think finding out, starting where the students are, and finding out where their interests are, from the very beginning, and building on that throughout the year is most important. I actually tried, after I heard Donalyn Miller speak at one of the annual meetings, I think it was the one in Orlando, I rushed out and bought and bought her book and had it read by, I think, the end of the second night, and tried my own choice book project, and knowing that might rustle some feathers because of our curriculum, kept data on it. And I had students who hadn't read a book in all of high school, and probably since maybe even before middle school, who were picking up books and using that opportunity to read what they wanted and having great success. So, yeah, things like what's the vampire?
Oh, Twilight?
The Twilight trilogy. There was a girl who hadn't read a book since elementary school and went through the whole Twilight trilogy. So, real success stories by allowing students choice and allowing them the time to reflect and get to know them.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to that as a parent as much as an educator. Sometimes the struggle is you want to see a certain kind of reading being done, but Donalyn Miller writes so beautifully about the spark within the student and how to just let that sort of emerge by letting them make their own choices, interest-driven choices. So I think there was a great nod to an important reference point for educators. Her book, the book. It's The Book Whisperer. Is that right? The Book Whisperer. Yeah, that's a fantastic one. Anybody else have any thoughts about interest-driven in the classroom before I try to move on to different topics? Oh, Dana. Yeah, great. Oh, and Mary Ellen. Fantastic. Let's start with Dana, since I said Dana first, and then Mary Ellen.
Kim made a great point with the student interest. I mean, once you have them reading what you want, as a practitioner, you can get them to do other things in the classroom. It's kind of like a little bargaining. Like, once you see them and you walk into a classroom and, like you said, one's reading Twilight, and I know in my classroom we have some of the people reading Sports Illustrated, and then some students are reading classics, and once you give them that time and that power, then they'll work with you. And it makes it a lot easier as an educator when the students are interested and they get that time, and then they're willing to do more of the work that you might have to be required to have them do. So I just want to make that point, that Kim made a great point about that student interest and finding that early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Mary Ellen, you sort of, you had something in your head.
Yes, even though I'm not a teacher in the classroom, I am a parent. And if it wasn't really for Harry Potter, my own children would not have read for pleasure. They're in their 20s now, and they do read for pleasure. They pick up just about any book. My daughter in particular will find a movie that had already been a book, and she'll watch the movie first and read the book and then compare the two, and of course we'll have a discussion about the whole thing and how the books are always better than the movies. So I just think that if kids could realize that, they probably would read more, because most of them do love movies.
Yeah, and what our sort of concern is that that room to find what you love and move in that direction is closed out a lot in the educational system. So we as teachers have to find the cracks and the spaces to open that up again for them. And I think that's a powerful call and inspiring thing to think about. Sorry about that mute for a second. So at this point, we're about halfway through our time together, and I think it's a perfect moment to sort of shift to the make cycle theme this week. And of course, the make cycle theme has been hack your writing, and as I mentioned earlier, this whole notion of remixing and innovative customization, and perhaps even a call to collective action within the context of writing and writing practice. So. There's a couple of things we could talk about. We could talk about the paper circuitry workshop a little bit more and what we took away from that yesterday, and we could also talk about what's been posted on the board in terms of hacking, and we could also talk about how we're opening up our pedagogy of writing in our classrooms to more creative entry points. I leave it open to you guys to sort of decide what thread you want to pick up on right now, but I'm sure you are all buzzing with ideas. Minu, maybe you want to sort of pick up on that a little bit, right? Because you and I have been so jazzed by this notion of writing as making when we're thinking about writing together, and it's such an exciting, area for us.
So something that I'm grappling with since I took part, and thank you for letting me do so, since I got to crash your hack your notebook party and got to play with LED lights and copper tape and figure out how parallel circuits work. And I posted my make online so others can see. Something that I've been thinking about is actually kicking off the school year, the next school year. I teach my students, 11th and 12th graders, English at the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. And I like many of you, themes and big questions and essential questions and big ideas, or even a word shape my classroom practice, or energize my classroom practice, or inspire my classroom practice. And this idea, writing as making, I want to explore this idea throughout the year, but I really want to kick the school year off with paper circuitry, sharing the paper circuitry hacking experience with my students as a way to frame and broaden the idea of text and making and hacking as part of the ethos of a reading, writing community that I'm going to try to build over the next 185 days. So I'm thinking about, like any teacher in America, even though it's summer, I'm thinking about what's going to be my planning. I have my journal, I have my blog, I have my mentors, and I'm deep in thinking about how am I going to shape a year of learning for this community of people who are going to come together. And I think it's also interesting that, in some ways I'll never fully be prepared for this task, because how can I prepare a year's worth of learning for people I haven't met yet, especially my 11th graders who will be new to me. So I think the idea of writing as making, and maybe exploring the paper circuitry hack with my students, can really frame my students' minds, hopefully, around a different type of learning space, a different type of learning community, where the definitions of text is even broadened, and maybe we can look into how do we illuminate, how do we really zero in on what's important in a text, and for lack of a better word, how do we light up the key words in the writing that we do and in the writing that we read as community of readers. So I really want to thank you for letting me play yesterday, and it's interesting that how just having time to play and hang out and learn from Mary Ellen, who was sitting next to me and helped me out with my hack, like how that can lead to really framing a whole year where the theme can be really expanded to writing as making. And then the teen magazine that I've done before can come in. Maybe my students can go on to make documentary films. maybe we can expand what reading and writing and deep thinking can really look like in different types of genres and in different types of texts. So that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm grappling with. That's what I'm learning about this summer and through this experience.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. One of the things I think is like sort of at the heart of this idea of writing as making is the notion of production-centered learning. So when you get your hands dirty, as we keep saying, you start to make something and you're working it out, especially with the circuitry work where it is either connected or not, right? It's not working or it is working. With that kind of thing, it's especially powerful. It's layered work. We were talking a little bit yesterday about the artistic challenge and the engineering challenge that's involved. And this, of course, sort of embraces this movement of STEAM, of the science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, right? But we had a great conversation as after we produced all of this beautiful work, we posted all of it up on, on a wall, and it essentially became a gallery of the things that we created. And I think one of the interesting points in our conversation that came out was this idea that our intentions, what we meant to do, aren't necessarily the end of the meaning of our product. So there were possible layered interpretations there that weren't necessarily a part of the authorial intent of the artist. I think that's a fascinating thing. When you make something that's so cool that other people see different kinds of meaning in it than the one that you had in mind as you were producing it. The fact that everyone had like an ability to experience that is extremely empowering. That brings back some of what Minu was talking about today about empowerment. At any rate, there's many things that can come from production-centered learning, and the making, I think, is at the heart of that possibility. So, what other things happened yesterday that maybe we should talk about our failures or like moments of frustration, or I don't think there were any epic fails yesterday because we all got it to light up and we all had beautiful things on the gallery wall. But still, there were frustrating moments. So does anyone want to talk about that?
I'm not sure, I'm not going to speak directly to the frustration, Mia, but I think Minu made a really important distinction this morning in her talk with us, and that is our students are so involved in being consumers of, of all kinds of media, and it's really important that we begin to reframe, and the beginning of the year is to allow them to see that they need to be and can be and are certainly experienced and valid enough to become producers of that kind of media. I think that's a really important distinction, and it's just that mind switch that allows the maker and writing is making that happen, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for drawing that out and sharing it with our bigger community. So crucial. We want our students not just to be consumers but producers, and the best place to get that sort of switch flipped is in the writing context. That was something we were able to all see together, I think, yesterday. I'm trying to think about other questions that might get us moving in a direction of thinking about why writing as a more expansive engagement in the digital age, why we need to think about it that way.
I think one of the points that I hope to make whenever I have an opportunity to share my practice and learn alongside other teachers is that I think our students need relevant audience for the work that they produce. If they write something, if they make something, and if it just lives in the four walls of that classroom, and I'm not saying you have to go public and publish every single thing you do, but if you are not taking some of the practice outside of your classroom, and if the only audience for your students' work is you, they are getting a very limited feedback because you have a certain stance, you have a certain bias, and you have a certain point of view, which yes, you are the expert in the classroom, and yes, you honor and cherish your students' work, but it is still so limiting. So I think there are lots of different ways to think about that. I think blogs and Twitter feeds and social networks obviously come to mind, but I think there are actually like in-person opportunities that that often get missed, and a lot of times not every school, unfortunately, has the affordance of connectivity and access to tools that allow students to easily make. But even if students are doing something like argumentative writing, or if they are doing expository writing, or if they are writing proposal, like let's say your students are proposing a new law for your local town. Like, what about bringing the local town leadership or the local city leadership to hear their proposal? Or if they have a business idea and they wrote a business proposal as part of your writing as making, stands and ethos, what if local business leaders came together and read their business ideas and proposals and gave feedback? This isn't simply about being online, but I think our students need to see lots of different people doing writing in their professional lives, and I think our students, and the other side of that coin is our students need to have their writing and their work seen by lots of people other than just us. And this doesn't mean you do everything online and the camera is always on in your classroom. I think the classroom is a sacred place, and sometimes those conversations that happen in the classroom are really powerful, and sometimes are sacred just for that community. But I think some stuff has to go out in order for it to have some meaning and to have some long-lasting impact on our students.
Such an important point, the community reach, and how it starts with their interest and then connects with a broader sense of the community and the context they're in. And that brings us back, of course, to the things that matter to them. So it's such an important point you just made. I was also thinking that maybe we could shed some light on what's been happening in the Google Plus board in terms of the call to hack your writing. Because one of the sort of great paradigms of the National Writing Project is position the educator as the learner. And when we're called to make things, we are instantly in the sort of seat of the learner, or we're assuming that position. So, Mary Ellen, you did some great posting since the beginning of the CL MOOC. I think everyone out there would agree. And I thought you might want to talk a little bit about how this notion of making. You've always been a maker, from what I understand from our chats. So how has making and writing come together for you, if at all? I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey.
Sure. Well, I'm a bit of a craftaholic, and so that started the world turning in my head. And then, of course, I became a writer. And how do you combine the two? So when I joined the CL MOOC, and all the different ideas that are out there and the different tools that I had never known existed, I started doing some playing, and a lot of what I saw with things like the different links. The latest one that I really am having a lot of fun with is the visual poetry. I even last night posted something that I got an idea from what Kevin Hodgson had done in his Wandering Through the Blog Hub, and he did some line lifting. So I did some line lifting out of other visual poetry poems and made a poem out of it. So, I hacked their writing to create my own poem. Of course, I gave them credit, as credit is due, but it's that kind of learning from someone else, as has been said, and the fact that I am a maker and a doer outside of the classroom. So it's through all of this constant making in my life that I have integrated the writing to go along with making. And I make poems, and I make stories, and I make essays, whatever. I haven't written a book yet, but it's up in my head somewhere. And I just love to learn and learn things from other people. I am a networker also, but not in the sense of from other teachers, but I have networked as far as business people and things like that, and a wide range of friends. And we are all learning from each other constantly. But I mostly am, like I said, because I am a craftaholic, and there are only enablers for craftaholics. There's no cure. I'm constantly enabled to learn something new and to make something new based on something that I have seen, heard, read, smelled, whatever. It's just all out there, and of course, as a writer, I'm making new things based on what I have recently learned.
That's fantastic. I just love that there's such synchronicity in your two identity points, and that the CL MOOC ties them together perfectly. You know, one thing that Erica just sent to me as a sort of great idea in the chat roll is the way in which the ISI, as a kind of national writing project tradition, is transforming due to connected learning. And of course, the CL MOOC is playing a role in the way in which the ISI might be changing a little bit. So I thought maybe Kim could throw out a few comments about what's happening in that regard.
Absolutely. Well, naturally, the notion of connected learning and allows making to come about naturally. But we really wanted to jump in with both feet this year and embrace the technology. And rather than having technology be, as it always has been, a separate strand, really seeing how far we could push it. And so far it's been, you know, it's working.
You know what, Kim? I just realized for the broader audience, they might not know what ISI means, so maybe you could explain a little bit what an ISI is. That was my fault for not sort of fronting that, but that's a good place to start, and then talk about how it's changed. You already started talking about how it's changing, so I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, that's fine.
It's a good foundation.
The Invitational Summer Institute is really one of the most important things that allows our sites to grow, and teachers come together and really strive to share their best practices and to learn from each other. And the difficult thing about taking out 4 weeks of your summer to commit to this is that people have very busy lives. And so we were trying to think of a way that we would allow allow connected learning to become more of our institute. And so we're experimenting with allowing teachers to connect with each other on the CL MOOC, on Google Hangouts, and reevaluating how we're looking at our teacher inquiry workshops, which is sort of the most basic element of our activities in the Summer Institute, and allow time for reflection. Reading groups and writing groups are meeting on Google Hangouts, and even our teacher inquiry workshops are transforming. So we're using Google Forms and a variety of different kinds of technology to, and all of these are ways to make. And we're learning as we do it. So you know, look for some good reflections on that in the future. But it's been a very exciting summer for us here.
Yes, I've been excited watching and sort of dipping in and out of it myself. I thought I might ask Dana what her experience has been thus far. Dana's sort of a little bit more than halfway through the Invitational Summer Institute this summer. And since this is the first summer that making has played a more central role, any impressions about the focus on that and how it might affect your classroom practice going forward?
Well, like I spoke earlier about the black and white sometimes in teaching, the ISI has helped me find my gray. I didn't think I had a gray area. When I heard about the making, had a little bit of trepidation, you know, a little nerve-wracking. But once you start making, it's kind of like you can't stop. So also, it puts you in that lens of a student. And you're like, this is frustrating and this is tough. And it's going to help me with my practice in the fall because I'm going to remember what it felt like. Hey, this was tough. It might seem simple to someone else, but it was a little rough for me. I have to say that the collaboration of the participants in the ISI and our leaders, especially Kim, she's been so helpful. Every time we want to make a change, she's up for it. And it's just been helping how important it is to show flexibility. And that everything can't be static.
I guess we've been hacking the ISI, huh? On some level, that's a little bit what we've been doing. Yeah, so back to the word hack to sort of, close out our conversation here. There have been these connotations that have a lot to do with sort of mischief, but I think meaning mischief in that undermining systems, and I love that metaphor to applied to education because I think it needs some undermining and some hacking in a way. We need to sort of, as I said earlier, open up spaces that are being shut down, and those spaces have to do with imagination and creativity and self-interest and driven learning, etc. So, as a kind of final parting thought we could wax reflective about, maybe we could talk a little bit about the possibility of community and collective action in writing practice. Minu, I thought, you mentioned your zine, but you didn't talk at all about process, so maybe in the last few minutes you could tell us a bit about what you're doing with your students in having them produce online magazine and all the different entry points for writing, critical thinking, analysis, and one wonderful point you made earlier today when we had our conversation locally here. All the soft learning skills that are happening, the negotiating, the emotional stuff as well. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and the role that all the different ways of writing, how different ways of writing play into that practice of yours.
So as a week process for last 2 years in my 11th grade high school English classroom, and it really is our answer to other teen magazines that I have seen, that my students have seen, that have questionable message about consuming and about beauty standards and about teen sexuality. And in face of those very loud and prominent media voices, we're producing our little homemade, 33 students and a teacher coming together. We're producing a teen magazine. Every student is serving as a writer of an article, or they're serving on teams made up of copywriters, layout designers, art designers, and the promotions team. And I think I can talk at length about this, but I think some of the things that have stood out to me as we've collaborated closely and worked hard to produce this teen magazine from start to finish, from research to actual publication. I think there are some valuable things that I've learned along the way. Again, the idea of interest-driven learning. Students are choosing the topics that they want to explore and think might be of interest to other teens. I think students are negotiating, and there's peer learning involved because not everyone has the same strengths in the classroom, so kids who might be good at design or layout are teaching other students who want to learn and take on those skills. And I think there is growth over time from like many of us. When we learn something new, we're apprehensive and we're unsure about where to even begin. I think students are going from how is this ever going to come together to actually producing something. I think just the power of making, I write about this in Thrive, even how time is experienced in our learning community feels different because we are producing, we are making, and we're under this deadline, very much like a media outlet might be under a deadline to produce something. And time feels different, and everyone sees time differently. The clock watching isn't happening because everyone has something meaningful to contribute to this larger process. And the last point I'd like to make is I think teachers are makers and are writers, because I think there's a very loud opposition to this webinar and the type of conversation we're having on this hangout about what teaching and teaching of writing can look like. I think there are forces and there are voices that would position themselves to say that, well, writing is like a computer program that teaches kids how to write the 5-paragraph essay. And I think if we believe differently, if we believe that teaching and learning can look differently as writing project teachers, as teachers in general, then I think we need to write our stories. I think we need to blog. I think we need to have a collective voice that positions ourselves in opposition to that idea and share our practice widely. Otherwise, by default, we're buying into what others are saying, what teaching is, what writing is, and how do you go about teaching writing to students. I think anyone who's even done this for a day knows that it's messy and it's hard, and there are no easy answers about how do you help students become lifelong readers and writers. And I think we as teachers need to tell these stories from our teaching lives, from our classrooms, from our communities, to collectively raise our voice against what others are saying about our work.
That's a beautiful point you made, and I'm so glad you made it, Minu, because it really draws out that theme of hacking that I had in mind when I put out our call this week to hack our writing. It brings up essentially the politics of creative thinking and the place that that has within a writing context. So in essence, how could, if we relinquish our own empowerment as leaders in the classroom, then how will we ever empower our students to be lifelong learners and have a life of the mind that will last well beyond the time that they have with you? This is a point you made earlier, and I'm so glad it's being made again. Some final thoughts. Does anyone want to throw out I can see some activity in the chat room, and I think I'll just mute my mic and let people throw in some final thoughts before we say our goodbyes. Go ahead, Mary Ellen.
Well, I was just going to say that one of the things that I participated in was a challenge that was based on Hemingway's shortest story, and by writing a story that was 25 words or less. And I actually did it, and there was another challenge that said to write I don't know if it was a 15 or a 25-word story without the word the, which I completed with the 25-word story that I wrote. No, I didn't use the word the in it either. And I just thought that if students could possibly write some kind of short story and don't necessarily give it a number of words, but maybe just fill up a page, but then ask them to shrink it down and take out the key points, let's say, it might still spark some interest in getting them to write anything, because it'll make them see which words in the sentences are important to the story. And that's one of the ways I think that this 25-word story can actually be happen, is if they start out with all the little words in between, and then hack it down to something smaller.
Sort of moving from macro focus to micro focus, and in the process seeing the power of each and every word.
Right.
Sounds great. Anybody else have any little tricks up their sleeve that they might roll out that come from this culture of remix, innovative customization?
I'm definitely going to think about remixing our writers' notebooks. I think the paper circuitry has definitely got me thinking. Mia, I've talked to you about this. So I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do with a few LED lights and copper tape and batteries. So I'm excited. I can't wait to get back in the classroom.
I'll just jump in here for a second. Well, two things. First of all, Mary Ellen is not alone in being a craftaholic, because I admittedly am too a craftaholic. And this Summer Institute and the paper circuitry thing was so exciting to be able to kind of meld personal interests with writing and just, you know, my outside with my academic life. And it was really exciting. And we're working on building a makerspace now, and I'm so excited. Like, beyond, you can't even imagine. It's like a dream come true. So all of this making as writing has been so powerful. The thing that I wanted to mention, and this is sort of a shout out to all of those folks out there who may not be in the K-12 crowd but are at the college level, because Kim is actually an adjunct here at Kane. I too am an adjunct here at Kane, and I also teach at Rutgers. And with my Rutgers students, I teach an online graduate level course on web-based multimedia design. And one of the things I have them do is called the Concept in 60. And you'll notice in the newsletter that we sort of mentioned this, that Mia and I wrote this week. And the Concept in 60 is sort of, it's a multimodal composition. So it is literally the marriage of the writing with the making. And in some ways is so much more powerful than just the words on the page, because it brings to life the composition itself. I mean, it is the images with the text that you may or may not use, the spoken word, the audio, because sometimes words can be so much more powerful when they're articulated through different venues, not just the text, so to speak. So that 25-word, having that image in the background when we were all in the MOOC and we were trying to, distill our 25-word stories based on that water and the bubbles and that whole thing, that just bringing the audio and the visual components to writing. And I think I might actually be teaching, hopefully in the fall, I'll be teaching composition, and I'm planning on using that as a really big part of multimodal composing in the classroom. I think it's a really great thing for students also in terms of interest-driven learning, to see where they go with it, where their strengths are. Because I know my students sort of start out as iffy, and they say, oh, I can't do that. And then they really sit there and they work really hard at it, and they create amazing things. And so it's really powerful in a lot of ways, and I think that sort of marriage there is like a really nice, just sort of making as writing. I mean, it's all in there. So I just wanted to sort of mention that as well.
Yeah, that's so fantastic, Erica. I'm really glad you brought up the Concept in 60, because it's a great exercise. It's a perfect trick for writing as making. Dana has the comments to make, and then we're almost out of time.
Speaking of making yesterday, I was just so inspired. I took my make, went home, showed it to my family, and put it on my refrigerator. And now, I'm not in kindergarten, obviously. And anybody who teaches in middle school and high school, sometimes we forget that how important it is to take that work home and put it on the refrigerator. And in our day and age now with this making, I'm thinking it might be a link that my students might show to their friends and family. So I'm hoping in the fall that my students are inspired as I am to make. And it might not be that magnet on the refrigerator holding it, it might be a link on their home computer. So I'm so inspired and ready to go into the fall as a maker rather than a teacher. So thank you.
Oh my God, that's such beautiful words. I think we're almost out of time, so I just wanted to say a few final thoughts that are important to me to say. The first is there is a the broader group cannot see. There's a room from which this webinar is being projected, full of really inspired TCs, very special people who were making with us yesterday and who have been spending the time this summer. And I'm really proud of the Kane University Writing Project and our community, and the fact that despite the discouragement that is heaped on educators in heavy doses, we are standing strong and inspiring each other. So I just want to say thank you for being such a great community. There they are! Woohoo! Yes! My first shout out to my community. The second shout out is to Minu. Thank you so much for spending a little time with us. These 2 days have been meaningful for all of us in different kinds of ways, but inspiration can go so far, so very far. So thank you for spending time with us. It's meant a lot to me and to everyone here. Finally,
thank you for that. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Yes, and finally, I just want to say we're having a Twitter chat tonight from 7 to 8 to just sort of revisit hack your writing, connected learning principles, and whatever it is we want to talk about that will inspire everybody. So again, thanks everybody. It's been a great hour, and I'm very proud.